What happens when one of the most respected journalists in television sits down with royalty, only to have the entire interview collapse in spectacular fashion? In just 38 seconds, a single comment would turn a primetime interview into an absolute disaster that no one saw coming. Anderson Cooper has built his career on asking the tough questions. For decades, he's sat across from world leaders, celebrities, and controversial figures, always maintaining his composure, always staying professional. His reputation is spotless. He's the kind of journalist who can make anyone feel comfortable while still getting to the truth. So when Prince Harry agreed to appear on 60 Minutes, everyone expected a compelling conversation. What they got instead was something nobody could have predicted. The interview started normally enough. The studio lights were bright, the cameras were rolling, and Anderson opened with his trademark calm demeanor. He welcomed Prince Harry to the show, thanking him for taking the time to sit down for what was supposed to be an in-depth conversation about his life, his family, and his future. Prince Harry settled into his chair with an air of confidence that bordered on arrogance. From the very first moment, there was something different about his energy. He wasn't the reserved, thoughtful person many had seen in previous interviews. There was an edge to him, a sharpness that felt almost aggressive. Anderson started with a simple question. You've been very open about your struggles with the media over the years. Can you talk about how that's affected your relationships? Prince Harry leaned back, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. Well, Anderson, I think the real question is why the media feels entitled to every aspect of my life. You're part of that machine, aren't you? The comment hung in the air for a moment. Anderson, ever the professional, smiled politely and redirected. I think what we're trying to do here is give you a platform to share your perspective. That's why you're here, isn't it? Is it? Prince Harry shot back. Or is this just another opportunity for you to boost your ratings by getting me to say something controversial? Anderson maintained his composure, his voice steady and measured. I can assure you, that's not my intention. I'm here to listen to your story, but I do have to ask the questions that people want answers to. That's my job, Prince Harry laughed, but there was no warmth in it. Your job, right, and my job is to sit here and perform for the cameras like some kind of trained animal? The tension in the studio was palpable now. The crew members behind the cameras exchanged nervous glances. This wasn't going according to plan. Anderson pressed forward, trying to steer the conversation back on track. Let's talk about your book, Anderson suggested, his tone still calm and professional. You've shared some very personal stories in it. What made you decide to be so open? You didn't read it, did you? Prince Harry interrupted, his voice dripping with condescension. Because if you had, you'd know the answer to that question. Anderson nodded slowly, his patience being tested but not broken. I did read it, actually. Cover to cover. I'm asking because I think our audience would benefit from hearing it in your own words, directly from you. Your audience? Prince Harry repeated mockingly. You mean the people who tune in to watch you pretend to care about important issues while you collect your massive paycheck? There was a collective intake of breath from everyone in the studio. This was crossing a line. Anderson's jaw tightened slightly, the first real sign that the prince's behavior was getting to him, but his voice remained controlled. I'm not sure what you're trying to accomplish here, Anderson said carefully, but I think we should focus on why you agreed to do this interview. You have things you want to say, don't you? Prince. Harry leaned forward aggressively. What I want is to not be interrogated by someone who thinks he's morally superior just because he wears a nice suit and reads from a teleprompter. I don't use a teleprompter for interviews, Anderson replied, his voice taking on a slightly firmer edge. And I'm not interrogating you. I'm asking you questions. That's how interviews work. Oh, is that how it works? Prince Harry's voice was rising now, his face flushing red. Thank you so much for explaining your profession to me, Anderson. I had no idea. Here I thought we were just two people having a conversation, but apparently I need you to educate me on how television works. Anderson took a slow breath, visibly working to maintain his professional demeanor. I think maybe we should take a moment and reset. We can start fresh with a different line of questioning if you'd prefer. I don't need your condescension, Prince Harry snapped. That's the problem with people like you. You act like you're doing everyone a favor by giving them airtime, when really you're just exploiting their stories for your own benefit. The accusation was serious and unfair, and Anderson's expression showed that he'd had enough of being disrespected in his own studio. His voice, when he spoke, was still professional but carried an unmistakable note of authority. I've spent my entire career trying to tell important stories with integrity and respect. I've interviewed grieving families, survivors of tragedies, people who've lost everything. I've never exploited anyone, and I'm not about to start now. I invited you here in good faith to give you an opportunity to share your perspective. But if you're going to sit here and attack my character, then maybe we need to reconsider whether this interview should continue. Prince Harry stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. Are you threatening me? I'm not threatening anyone, Anderson replied, remaining seated, his voice calm but firm. I'm simply saying that mutual respect is required for this conversation to work, and right now, I'm not feeling that from you. Mutual respect? Prince Harry's voice was almost a shout now. You want to talk about respect? You, who makes millions of dollars asking invasive questions and then pretending you're some kind of hero for it? Anderson stood up slowly, his height matching the prince's, his composure intact despite the escalating situation. I think we're done here. This interview is over. You can't just end the interview. Prince Harry protested, his entitlement showing through every word. I'm not finished talking. Actually, I can, Anderson said firmly. This is my show. And I'm not going to sit here and be berated by someone who agreed to come on and then decided to turn it into a personal attack session. Prince Harry's face was now completely red, his hands gesturing wildly. This is exactly what I'm talking about. The media thinks they can control everything. You think you can control me? I'm not trying to control you, Anderson responded, his voice steady and resolute. I'm trying to have a respectful conversation. You're the one who came in here with an agenda that had nothing to do with having an actual dialogue. My agenda? Prince Harry laughed bitterly. My agenda is to not be treated like I'm some kind of curiosity for your viewers to gawk at. Anderson shook his head, his disappointment visible. That was never my intention, and I think you know that. But you came in here looking for a fight, and now you've got one. The difference is, I'm not going to engage with it any further. So you're kicking me off? Prince Harry demanded, his voice incredulous. You're actually kicking me off your show? You've made it impossible to continue, Anderson replied. Every question I've asked, you've responded with hostility and personal attacks. This isn't an interview anymore. It's just you venting your proper frustrations at me personally, and I don't think that's productive for anyone. Prince Harry took a step closer, his voice low and threatening. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Anderson didn't back down, his voice remaining level. I know exactly who I'm dealing with. I'm dealing with someone who agreed to an interview and then sabotaged it because apparently that was more appealing than having an honest conversation. Honest conversation? Prince Harry scoffed. There's nothing honest about this. You people are all the same. You smile and pretend to care, but really you're just vultures picking at bones. I'm going to ask you to leave now, Anderson said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Security will escort you out if necessary, but I'd prefer if you left on your own. Prince Harry's eyes widened in disbelief. You're serious. You're actually serious. Completely serious, Anderson confirmed. This interview is over and you need to leave the studio. For the moment, Prince Harry seemed frozen, as if he couldn't quite believe what was happening. Then his expression twisted into something ugly, something that revealed the true extent of his entitlement. You'll regret this, he said, his voice shaking with barely contained rage. Do you have any idea what kind of consequences this will have for you? Anderson's response was measured and calm, showing exactly why he's respected in his field. The only thing I regret is that we couldn't have the conversation I hoped we'd have, but I'm not going to be intimidated, and I'm not going to tolerate being disrespected in my own studio. So yes, you need to leave, now. Prince Harry looked around the studio, as if expecting someone to come to his defense, but the crew members all looked away. Nobody was going to support his behavior. The entitlement that had carried him through the entire disastrous exchange was finally meeting reality. This is unbelievable, Prince Harry muttered, but he was already moving toward the edge of the set. Absolutely unbelievable. What's unbelievable? Anderson said, speaking loud enough for everyone to hear, is that you came here with an opportunity to share your story with millions of people, and you chose to waste it by attacking me instead. Prince Harry spun around one last time, his finger pointed accusingly at Anderson. You have no right to judge me. None. You sit in your comfortable studio and you judge everyone who comes through here, but you're no better than anyone else. Anderson didn't take the bait. His voice was tired now, as if the weight of the entire encounter was finally showing. I'm not judging you. I'm just disappointed. I really did want to hear what you had to say. But you made that impossible. I made it Impossible? Prince Harry's voice cracked with indignation. You're the one who kept asking your loaded questions, trying to trap me into saying something you could use against me. Every question I asked was straightforward and fair, Anderson countered. You're the one who chose to interpret them as attacks. That says more about your mindset coming into this than it does about my intentions. Prince Harry opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, a producer appeared at the edge of the set, speaking quietly but firmly. Sir, we need you to leave the studio now. The prince's face cycled through several emotions in rapid succession: anger, indignation, disbelief, and finally something that might have been embarrassment. But even in that moment, he couldn't let it go without one final jab. You're all pathetic, he said, his voice carrying across the studio. Every single one of you. You think you're so important because you work in television, but you're just puppets, all of you, especially you, Anderson. You're the biggest puppet of them all. Anderson didn't respond. He simply stood there, his arms crossed, his expression neutral, waiting for the prince to finally leave. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of Prince Harry's footsteps as he stormed off the set. The heavy studio door slammed shut behind him, the sound echoing through the space. For several long seconds, nobody moved, nobody spoke. The crew members stood frozen, processing what they'd just witnessed. Anderson remained standing in the middle of the set, his posture still professional despite everything that had just happened. Finally, one of the producers approached him cautiously. Anderson, are you okay? He nodded slowly, uncrossing his arms. I'm fine. That was unfortunate, but it was necessary. We got all of it on camera, the producer said quietly. Everything from the moment things started going sideways. Anderson thought for a moment, then shook his head. We're not airing it. None of it. The producer looked surprised. But Anderson, this is huge. People will want to see what happened. I know they will, Anderson replied, but that's not why we do this. We're not here to humiliate people or to air confrontations for entertainment value. What happened here was unfortunate enough without turning it into a spectacle. Another voice chimed in from across the studio. He attacked you personally, Anderson, multiple times. You have every right to show people what really happened. Anderson turned to face the speaker, his expression thoughtful. Maybe. But I'm not interested in winning a public relations battle. I'm interested in maintaining the integrity of this program. We invited him here for an interview, not to create drama. The fact that it turned into drama doesn't change our responsibilities. The studio gradually came back to life as people began moving around, talking in hushed voices, processing the bizarre encounter they'd all witnessed. Anderson walked back to his chair, sat down heavily, and let out a long breath. The weight of what had just transpired was evident in his posture, but his resolve remained firm. A production assistant approached with a bottle of water, which Anderson accepted gratefully. He took a long drink, then looked around at his team, all of whom were watching him with a mixture of concern and admiration. I want everyone to know, he said, his voice carrying clearly, that what happened here today was not anyone's fault, except mine, for thinking we could have a productive conversation. I take full responsibility for how this turned out. That's not fair, Anderson, the producer protested. You handled that with incredible professionalism. He was hostile from the very beginning. There was nothing you could have done differently. Anderson smiled wanly. Maybe, but I keep thinking there must have been some way to reach him. Some question I could have asked that would have opened up a real dialogue instead of triggering whatever defensive mechanism he was operating under. Some people don't want dialogue, another crew member offered. Some people just want confrontation. I think he came in here looking for exactly what happened. The observation hung in the air, and Anderson couldn't entirely disagree with it. Looking back over the encounter, it did seem as though Prince Harry had been determined to turn the interview into a confrontation from the very first question. Every attempt Anderson had made to redirect, to find common ground, to create space for genuine conversation had been met with hostility and accusation. The thing that bothers me most, Anderson said quietly, is that there was probably a real interview in there somewhere. Real things he wanted to talk about, real frustrations he wanted to express. But he was so wrapped up in his defensiveness and his assumptions about what this was going to be that he never gave us a chance to get there. A makeup artist who had been standing nearby spoke up. For what it's worth, Anderson, I've been working on this show for 8 years. I've seen you interview hundreds of people. You treat everyone with respect, no matter who they are or what they've done. What he said about you exploiting people, about you being a puppet, none of that is true, and everyone here knows it. There were murmurs of agreement from around the studio. Anderson looked genuinely touched by the support, but he waved it off modestly. I appreciate that, I really do. But at the end of the day, an interview fell apart on my watch, and that's something I need to think about. An interview fell apart because someone came in with an axe to grind, the producer corrected gently. You can't control that. Anderson stood up again, rolling his shoulders as if trying to shake off the tension of the past hour. No, I can't. But I can control how I respond to it, and I can control what we do with the footage, which, as I said, is nothing. We're not airing any of this. The decision was met with some disappointed looks, but nobody argued. They all knew Anderson well enough to know that when he made a decision like this, it was final. More importantly, they respected why he was making it. Despite having every right to defend himself publicly, despite having clear video evidence of Prince Harry's aggressive and entitled behavior, Anderson was choosing the high road. So what do we tell people? The producer asked practically. There are already questions about what happened. Word is going to get out. Anderson considered this. We'll release a brief statement saying that the interview didn't work out and won't be airing. We don't need to elaborate beyond that. If people want to speculate, they will, but we're not going to feed into it. And if he talks about it publicly, if he tells his version of events, then that's his choice. Anderson replied calmly. But we're not going to engage in a back and forth. We're not going to argue about what happened or who was right or wrong. We're just going to move forward with dignity and professionalism, which is what this show has always been about. The team nodded, understanding his reasoning, even if some of them wished they could defend their colleague more publicly. Anderson looked around at all of them, his expression grateful. I want to thank all of you, he said sincerely, for staying professional throughout that entire thing, for supporting me, and for understanding why we're handling it this way. This show is only as good as the people who make it, and you're all the best in the business. As the crew began the process of breaking down the set and wrapping up for the day, the initial shock of what had happened started to give way to a kind of resigned acceptance. They had all witnessed something unprecedented, something that would probably be talked about internally for years to come, but that the public would never see. Anderson gathered his notes, such as they were, and prepared to leave the studio. Before he left, he took one last look around the space where such a strange and unfortunate encounter had just taken place. There was no satisfaction in how it had ended, only a kind of weary disappointment that an opportunity for meaningful dialogue had been squandered so completely. The truth was, Anderson really had wanted to hear what Prince Harry had to say. Despite all the controversies and the headlines, despite the public feuds and the tell-all projects, Anderson had approached the interview with genuine curiosity and openness. He had prepared thoughtful questions, had done his research, had been ready to listen without judgment. But none of that had mattered in the face of someone determined to view him as an adversary from the very first moment. As he walked toward the exit, Anderson reflected on the nature of interviews and human communication. Sometimes, no matter how skilled you are, no matter how good your intentions, you simply cannot connect with someone who has already decided you're the enemy. Prince Harry had walked into that studio with his defenses up, and his assumptions locked in place, and nothing Anderson could have said or done would have changed that. The disappointing part was not the personal attacks. Anderson had been in journalism long enough to have developed thick skin when it came to criticism and hostility. What disappointed him was the waste of it all. The waste of an opportunity, the waste of a platform, the waste of a chance to have a conversation that might have illuminated something important or meaningful. Instead, what had happened was a masterclass in how entitlement and defensiveness can derail even the most well-intentioned exchange. Prince Harry had come into the interview with grievances, real or imagined, and had decided that Anderson was a suitable target for all of them. Every question had been interpreted as an attack. Every attempt at dialogue had been met with suspicion and hostility. It had been exhausting and ultimately pointless, but Anderson knew better than to dwell on it. In his decades of journalism, he had conducted thousands of interviews. Some had been transcendent, some had been merely informative, and a very small number, like this one, had been complete disasters. That was the nature of the work. You approached every interview with the same professionalism and preparation, and you hoped for the best, while being prepared for the worst. This had certainly been the worst. As he finally left the building and stepped out into the cool evening air, Anderson allowed himself one moment of frustration, One moment of wondering why someone would agree to an interview only to sabotage it so completely. Then, he let it go. There were other stories to tell, other interviews to conduct, other opportunities to do the work he loved and believed in. Back in the studio, the crew continued their work, their conversations inevitably circling back to what they had just witnessed. They talked about the moment when things first started to go wrong, about the look on Anderson's face, when Prince Harry made his first accusatory comment, about the tension that had built with each exchange until it finally exploded into the confrontation that ended the interview. They talked about how Anderson had handled it, how he had maintained his composure even in the face of increasingly aggressive behavior, how he had tried repeatedly to redirect and salvage the conversation before finally, reluctantly, calling an end to it. They talked about his decision not to air any of the footage, and while some questioned whether it was the right call, most agreed that it was the principled one. What had happened in that studio was a collision between two very different perspectives. On one side, a journalist trying to do his job with integrity and professionalism. On the other, a public figure who had apparently walked in with so many preconceptions and so much hostility that no real conversation was ever possible. The cameras had captured everything: the escalating tension, the personal attacks. The moment when Anderson finally said enough was enough. It was all there, preserved on digital media, a complete record of an interview gone spectacularly wrong. But true to his word, Anderson made sure that footage would never see the light of day. It would be easy to judge Prince Harry harshly for his behavior, and many who witnessed it did exactly that. His entitlement, his hostility, his complete inability to engage in good faith dialogue had been on full display. He had taken an opportunity that many people would have valued and treated it with contempt, as if simply being there was somehow beneath him. But Anderson, characteristically, was more measured in his assessment. He recognized that people who behave that way are often coming from a place of deep hurt or insecurity, even if that doesn't excuse the behavior. He understood that public figures, especially those who have experienced genuine media harassment, can develop such strong defenses that they end up attacking even when no attack is coming. None of that changed what had happened, but it provided context. It explained, if it didn't excuse, why someone might walk into an interview with such hostility and suspicion. It was sad, really, when you thought about it that way. Sad that someone would be so consumed by their grievances that they couldn't see an opportunity for what it was. Sad that defensiveness would win out over dialogue. As the studio lights were finally turned off and the space fell into darkness, the day's events settled into history. An interview that was supposed to happen never did. A conversation that might have been meaningful never materialized. Instead, what occurred was a cautionary tale about the importance of good faith, about the necessity of mutual respect, and about what happens when someone comes to the table not to talk, but to fight. Anderson would move on to other interviews, other stories, other opportunities to do the work that had defined his career. The incident would fade from the immediate consciousness of his team, becoming one of those strange footnotes in the show's history. Prince Harry would presumably go on with his life, perhaps never quite understanding what had been lost in that studio, or perhaps understanding it all too well.